So where do you see the slides to bring up the three vertical dots show upload and manage file, manage slides?
Yeah.
Oh,
Found it.
how did you?
Okay. So in the
In,
next to the hand, just to the left.
oh, share
Sorry.
slides.
Yep,
Oh,
that's the button,
okay,
and that opens up all of the slides that have been updated.
okay. Do you want me to do that? Oh,
You're gonna be doing most of the talking. I can do the clicking if you want,
okay,
or you can
okay.
do the clicking. Okay, I think we can both do the clicking. Maybe not. Is something broken? The screen.
Oh,
Yeah. Oh, sure enough.
good morning, folks, and good afternoon. I think it's all morning at this time, I imagine, but I'm sure there's afternoon somewhere. Oh, okay. Good morning, everybody. This is Sanjay Mishra, and I'm joined here by my co-chair, Chris Lemons. And in the room, we've got Francesca, and we've got a couple more people in the room. So this is the Content Delivery Network Interconnection Working Group session on Friday, bright and early at 9:30 in the morning here in Dublin. No rain, just gray skies, but it's not too bad. It's about 50 degrees. All right, let's see if I can. I think, Chris, you'll have to do the next slide. Okay, so let's start with the note well. This is a reminder of IETF policies that are in effect and covers various topics on patents, code of conduct, and there are a number of resources that are listed here that provides more details and information. So be very aware of these policies. And as you can see, this covers a variety of different areas: copyright, code of conduct, patents and participation, anti-harassment procedures, and the processes for working group, as well as the standards process within the IETF. And those are all very useful resources. So note well. Next slide, please. And this is important, a critical piece of information. So be aware. And uh, this slide is really just pointing out that there are resources to help with for any concerns on the observed behavior or any harassment policies, etc. So there are guidelines, and you can speak with confidentiality to raise any concerns that you see that you feel that there's some harassment or other conduct within the IETF. Um, and so I think that covers that slide. And then the next one here, these are some of the meeting tips. And if you have survived through Friday, then this is much more repetition of on the fifth day. But some of you may be just joining today. So these are some of the tips for particularly we've got some crowd that is remote. So keep your video off, but when you're talking, then just turn the audio and the video on. And also be make sure that if you want to get into the queue to join the mic, click on the raised hand to get into the queue, and then after you are done, you can remove yourself from the queue. And if the chairs also have a way to lock the queue if it seems like we've covered the topic in details, or we do not have enough time to go through the details, then we will lock the queue as needed. Um, and we might be doing some polls, etc., and then show of hands. So those are the options that you do have available. And the next slide is the agenda. So you have that resource. You can click on that to look at the agenda. And I'm going to be going through that in the next slide anyway. But the agenda is uploaded there, and the other information that you have, all the documents that you can find, and the charter in that link, mailing list if you have not joined. You can do that by signing up to CDNI at IETF.org. You have to have a data tracker account log in, and then go to the CDNI page, and then sign yourself in. Other resource, MedEcho, etc., is there. Meet Echo, I should say. Um, okay, so that's on this slide, and let's start with the next slide. Okay,
We have an agenda slide.
I had an agenda slide, and I don't know where. Can you go to the next slide?
Aha.
Yes. So here's the agenda slide. Slightly one slide too soon on the other one. So this is the agenda, and we have tried to squish it into one page, so it's kind of easier to follow through. So we're gonna start out with a quick update that I will provide on the capacity insight document, and also then we'll spend about 20 minutes on the topics that are basically that are coming out of these two drafts, the protected secrets and the logging extension. And both of these documents have references which can be seen as third party. So we want to discuss that and see how we want to have a path forward to address and tackle the reference of third party. So we'll spend about 20 minutes in those two drafts that cover that. And we will then, the fourth item here is the proposed rechartering. Chris is going to drive the conversation. And we are discussing rechartering because of the reason of the two drafts that you see there, processing stages and the metadata expression language. Um, these are within the scope of the charter, but we want to make sure that the language is sufficient enough that is allowing to address any topic that come up within the processing stages, such as uh, data that gets massaged or created in between the two CDNs. So we'll spend some 25 minutes there, and then we probably will do some polling as well on what the way forward is. And then the next on the list is the CI and triggers. Um, so we've got version 15 now. So Jay and Alan have done a lot of work in this draft between version 12, 13, 14, and now 15. So Alan and Jay will kick off the updates to where the document is and what the next steps are. And I think this document is coming close to being finished. Then Alan will also continue on this named footprint document. And after that, Alfonso will give an update on the edge control metadata. And then we've got three topics that we're going to cover under the open mic. So Guillaume will talk through some of the new ideas and draft that he's working on. So he wants to talk about that. And then Alan will talk about cache management interface. So that's on the agenda. And is there anyone in the room or remotely have any questions, any agenda bashing?
I have a very minor agenda bash. We need a note taker. Can I get someone to volunteer to take notes so that we can begin in earnest?
And the notes don't have to be descriptive. They just need to write the key point of the discussion.
Yeah, the notes are not replacing the transcript of the room, and in fact, they shouldn't, because that's too much detail. We just need to capture any kind of decisions that are made, outcomes of polls. We can't actually begin in earnest until I have a note taker.
This could be simply on the text document, simple uh, draft and what the outcome is. So we don't need any descriptive details. Any volunteers? Jay, I have to start calling out the names.
Okay, since no one else is volunteering, I'll take notes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, so can we just go back to the previous slide now, and then we'll start with the capacity insight slide. So here, I just wanted to recognize that the group has published RFC 9677. Uh, this this really reflects work which was not only done over the last 3 years as a standalone document, but if you also consider that its origin that came way back in 2017 where the original draft was first created, and that had the elements of what now we have as RFC 9538 and 9677, dealing with the two separate delegation schemes. So just to note that how much hard work has gone down, I've put the timelines also of both the RFC 9538 on the top and 9677 at the bottom, from their inception to completion. So first off, our congratulations to Christophe, Emil, Guillaume, and Frederick for their hard work in this. And also, we're missing Kevin Ma today. Unfortunately, he could not join us due to some family emergencies. But his reviews have really helped, and I know the authors do recognize all his contribution. And of course, Francesca for working through the draft very diligently and moving this up the chain. So thank you, Francesca. Okay, with that said, if Chris, if you can bring up the next deck, and I'll just talk through the capacity insight, and then we'll move on to the next one. Okay, so I wanted to give where we are with this document. Number one, Ben has published V10, version 10, on October 23rd. And this now addresses all open comments that were submitted during the IESG review. And now the document is in the state of waiting for a IESG telechat review that is scheduled for Thursday, November 21st. And I do have a question for Francesca. That I was looking at the telechat, and you had suggested that that chairs or anyone else that wants to join can join. But I didn't see the link to the conference bridge and things like that. So maybe I was not looking at the right place.
Hi, Francesca. Yes. So the way it works is anyone can join a telechat as an observer. So you're not supposed to talk when you're gonna be listening to the ISG going through all the documents and deciding. And when it's your document, if there is any like open point or something that requires discussion, I, as the responsible AD, can ask you, working group author or chair or whoever wants to participate, to like jump in and answer concerns if there are any. In general, it's good if someone can be in the call if there is any discuss. It's not necessary if there is if the document is all green, and then it will be just like a sort of a check. But yeah, I can post the link for the telechat to the chat so that people know where it is.
Okay, great. Yes, thank you. And I'm going to put that on my calendar as well. So if I am able to join, then I will join. And anyone from any authors that have the time to join, certainly join that. So at least we can listen through. And if there are any questions, then we can just take them right there and then address those. So, but anyway, so it's scheduled for November 21st. Yes, November 21st. And then hopefully based on either there are comments that can be addressed on the call or subsequently. And if there are no questions, then the document will just move forward. So that's the status there. And I just threw out the link that I see where Magnus has posted it for a TSV TSV area to also make a final pass at the document. And one last thing is that Guillaume had also posted an email with some comments, and I know Andy, Ryan, and Guillaume, you have had some back and forth on some ideas and things that that can be addressed. So, such as the capacity limit types, ingress, and the cache utilization, etc. So, I think those are probably good topics, and the best course would be to work on a draft and submit that to the working group. And you may have other items that were not necessarily covered in this document that you would be able to tackle in the new draft. And also, as Ben said, that the INR registration you can add additional items that you end up coming up with in this draft, in the new draft. Okay, and that's that on it. Are there any questions on this draft? All right, hearing none. So let's move to the next document.
I believe the next thing on the agenda is the conversation around the third-party dependencies. Ben, I didn't see any slides. I'm not sure that we need them.
I don't have slides, but I do have some notes that I would like to work through very quickly.
Yes, please.
To frame this discussion. So the whole dilemma here is how we deal with third-party dependencies that are not open standards. So I think first it's useful to categorize the types of the categorize those dependencies. So obviously on the one hand, we have completely open standards, IETF internet drafts, for example, that are completely unencumbered. And on the complete opposite end of that, we have those things that are not usable because they're encumbered by patents, NDAs. There's no real documentations, so people who are integrating are just reverse engineering it. Those types of things are completely unusable in an internet draft. But we have this area in between where perhaps we could reference it, and I think it's very useful to reference it. And that includes things that are well documented and adopted throughout the industry. So even though it may have been initially created by a particular company, it's now used across many companies, or perhaps used in open source software, where it's not a standard, but it is freely usable by anyone for most any purpose. So we have those categories of those dependencies, and then we have the different ways that we use them. So there are some dependencies that are deeply integrated into our drafts. So the specification language itself is dependent on specific features or documented language or whatnot that requires reference to that outside dependency, without which it would be impossible to specify whatever it is in the draft. But we also have dependencies that are mere references. So the examples we can use here are things like the S3 transport in the logging draft, where we're not reliant on anything in the S3 interface. We're merely including a reference to it so that we can specify the type of the thing of what the thing is that we're linking to, and have a configuration object, which is just a bunch of key value pairs that get passed through. But the responsibility for utilizing that interface is entirely outside the scope of what's defined in that logging draft. So that's basically all the references we currently have. So in the secrets draft, we have a reference to HashiCorp Vault. In logging, we have that reference to S3. We also have a reference to Kafka, which is open source software. I believe Vault is actually open source now under the BSL, whether you consider that open source or not. And then in that source access control draft, we have a reference to AWS v4 auth, which is an AWS service. But none of those require a direct reference to anything in external specifications or documentation. So, we're essentially just saying we're talking about this thing and it's over there. Here's a link to it, and here's here's an object with some key value pairs that you can utilize when you go talk to that thing. But we're not actually utilizing any of the details of those interfaces. And I wanted to call it one future interface as well that I'd like to use, which is the Prometheus exposition format when we get into talking about telemetry. So that's something that's widely used. It's a text-based format, and that's an example of documentation. But again, I don't think anything that we're going to do with that is going to be reliant on the format itself, merely specifying that there is an endpoint somewhere available, and it happens to be in this particular format. So yeah. So anyway, so I think that I think sums up the use cases for third-party dependencies in the scope of CDNI. Chris, if you think it's you have any thoughts to frame this in a different way, please.
Chris Lemons. We can hear me? Okay. Chris Lemons, speaking with no hats on over here at the no hats microphone. It feels very weird to me to have what feels to me to be a normative dependency on private third-party corporation controlled interfaces. And I don't know that I agree that we are just that we are not that it's not a normative dependency. So yes, we're just handing around a in the case of the first one I've looked at, the HashiCorp. You're basically hand out a URI and some basic authentication info, and that's great. But anyone implementing that URI, anyone who actually is trying to use it, has to know the details of that protocol, right? You can't integrate with those APIs without knowing what those APIs look like. And the way you see this in the document is that we have a reference to those API documents, which are not version controlled, are controlled by a third party entirely. They can put whatever they want there. And anyone that is using our integration protocol is going to have to comply with whatever those documents say. And that doesn't feel correct to me for an IETF standard. Although I will admit there is no formal rule that would prohibit us from doing so. The document as it stands does not currently break any specific rule. We have talked with all of the appropriate folks, and we can do it if we want to. And if we think that we can convince the IESG that it's a great idea. In some cases, it feels different than others. In particular, for example, the HashiCorp. That is the only transit we have other than the basic. And so, if you are implementing this, that's the thing that there is. It is generally speaking my feeling that these third-party dependencies should be published, but I am not convinced that here is the correct place to publish them. I think that had I my druthers, they would be published using the specification required and simply registered with IANA and some appropriate standards body. The SVTA comes to mind, but we're not in charge of what they decide to do. Some appropriate standards body would publish those specifications and register the types with IANA, and then it would be easy for anyone to use. That is my no hats opinion.
Ben, go ahead.
Yep, I definitely hear you, Chris. I will point out, you said there's no version control, but the Vault reference, for example, references a specific version of Vault, which has documentation published for that specific version of Vault. It's not Vault product in general. It's a specific version of that Vault KV interface. Yeah, I guess my point of view is that for these documents to be actually useful, they need to support the software and services that the people implementing them are actually using in production. And without direct support for that, I question the utility of these drafts at all. Like you mentioned the SVTA, but nobody is going to be implementing, I think, the CDNI version of this while also using just the SVTA, reference to Vault, for instance, right? They're going to just use an SVTA specification instead, which kind of defeats the purpose, I think, of publishing this through the IETF. So if the document is left without any utility, I think it only exists for the sake of itself rather than for being actually useful. So Vault is the only reference currently in secrets. That's true. That's because I'm the only one who worked on that, and I'm not really familiar with some of the other services that are used. And I would definitely invite participation from others to include support for other services, which is, I guess, my message is that I would rather be inclusive and provide as much functionality out of the box with these drafts as we possibly can, rather than leaving it as an exercise to the implementers to go out to, however many and other organizations and find a bunch of disparate specifications and try to tie them all together, and hope that they are indeed compatible, even though they were discussed and drafted and published in different bodies. Because an IANA registration is not really a guarantee of that, versus the rigorous review that it gets in in this working group. So that's my point of view.
I'll make 2 points, and then I think Sanjay's in the queue. I would point out that this is effectively not being reviewed by this body because we're only reviewing the form of the information and not how it's used. So, like, this body is not reviewing the Vault specification in any way. We're just reviewing the URI that points there. And I think that's okay. I would feel a lot better if it weren't the only one. But also, I don't feel strongly enough that if I'm the only one that feels that way, then I'm okay moving this forward and seeing how the IESG feels about it when we're done with it. But I would be remiss if I didn't bring up my thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. So I'm just thinking through here loudly, but would it make sense that if there's some participation by this third party, and if they're able to speak to something and even like they concur that we concur the use of our product in this way, and that they're okay with it, and anything from the copyright standpoint.
I don't think they
It's a
care.
different aspect to the conversation here, but I'm just thinking out, does that in any way sort of makes the question of, because the third party, let's assume that third party is used in the draft and it goes to the IESG. So would something like that also help IESG to make an informed decision that when they're looking at an RFC, looking at a draft, going into the RFC, uses the third party, but that also has some cooperation from the third party in the sense that they fully support that work, and that there are no other issues that they see.
I don't think they care. And also, I don't think we necessarily care what they think. I don't care what they think. Oh, pardon. We have AV people fixing things in the room. Ben, I think you're up.
Okay, yeah, I was just gonna say I also don't think that applies to any of the things we're currently referencing. Like things like the HashiCorp product, I found they have a license for all of their use of their trademarks, which cover our use case. I don't think that's an issue with Amazon either.
And IETF legal, we asked, and they basically said, you're using it nominatively. You can do what you like.
Yeah, right. Because I think it's fair use in any case.
Their feedback was also, so imagine you had a specification that required you to use Microsoft Word. Like, why would you do that? Do you want to poll the question? Because I want to get an answer to this so that we, with a hat on, I'd like to get an answer to this so that we can move the document forward, because we've discussed this now multiple IETFs. I'm not sure people's opinions are going to change. So if we can get consensus of the room, we can move the document forward and find a way, one way or another.
So what is the question? What is the question you want me to ask, to be sure that I'm representing what you're thinking?
Should this working group publish? I have to frame this as a yes or no question because you only get yes or no. Should this working group include third-party dependencies like HashiCorp Vault in documents that we publish?
So I see this, the show of hands. That's not the poll, right?
Yeah, show of hands. Yeah, it's a show of hands.
But where's the yes or no?
You just ask the question, and it'll tell you yes or no.
Okay, so I'm starting the poll, and folks on, you should be able to see that, and then please respond to it.
I see Jay in the queue.
Sorry, I hit the wrong button.
We'll give it about 30 more seconds.
30 more seconds.
Can you play the Jeopardy theme song, or is that not permitted because of copyright?
You make things real fun for the people trying to publish these on YouTube. Get the IETF copyright struck.
Okay, maybe I conclude the poll. Hopefully it doesn't go away. Let's see.
Perfect.
Perfect. All right. So we've got the response with the majority of the people that responded with a yes. and a minority no, and a couple of folks with no opinion.
You can safely record the results in the room as unanimous with the exception of me. So we'll move forward.
All right, thank you. So I think the decision is to move forward with this document as it is. So Ben, you can, if there are any other additional changes that you are waiting for or you're waiting for reviews, so we'll put this result in the mailing list and also ask for people to review the document anyway. But I'll leave it up to you if you have any changes that you propose. And before we go forward, we do have our chair, not the chair, our AD, Francesca. She has some comments on this.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, let's make sure to put that in the Shepherd write-up. That's the right place to put this sort of like consensus, rough consensus decisions. So
Yeah, there's a whole specific question. There's a whole specific question in the Shepherd write-up asking for details like this in the consensus portion. And there's also a section where they ask you to call out any specific down refs, and this would be one of those. So both places, just call their attention to it. It'll be great. Or it won't, one way or another.
Yeah, and I think this, just to be clear, this applies to both the drafts, the logging draft that references AWS and S3, et cetera, and the HashiCorp Vault in the protected secrets.
Yeah, and I just want to say, like, aside from this, the drafts could also just use review in general, but especially that secrets draft, because I don't think that's gotten much activity, and anything related to security like that, I think deserves a serious review.
Yeah. So one last point I would make is that I really request all the participants that are here to please review every document, but in particular that we have just talked about, these two documents, protected secrets and logging, because they are working group drafts. We do need a rigorous reviews, and Ben can only do as much as he can, but he really relies on us, and particularly everybody else that participates in this in this working group to review the document, please, and post your comments on the CDNI mailing list. All right. Thank you, Ben.
Guillaume.
Oh, Guillaume is on the queue. Guillaume, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add the fact that although references to third parties specification is accepted, and it's first of all, it's not accepted only for the two draft, but for any kind of draft, any further draft that we could have in CDNI at least. And the second remark is that it doesn't preclude the fact that you need to point out a spec. So, for example, S3 doesn't mean anything if you don't reference a spec. I mean, a document that explains what is S3 exactly, right? So, because otherwise there is a problem of interoperability.
Okay, yeah, let's, note taker, please make sure that you include this comment.
Got it.
Next.
Thank you, Jay. Okay, very good. So we are now going to pivot over to the next topic. This is going to be on the CDNI recharter. And our esteemed co-chair, Chris Lemons, has taken the lead on bringing up the conversation.
All right. So this may go very quickly. We'll see. All right. So we have two documents before us that we have carefully read through, and it's my opinion that they do not fall within the current charter. That the current charter does not allow us to do them, but there does seem to be fairly significant interest in the group towards actually advancing these documents. And so in order to facilitate that, I would like to attempt to recharter the group in order to rescope what we want to do. These two documents are the processing stages draft, which defines new content to be returned for things like error messages and splash pages and that sort of thing. It defines it generically. So while it appears in the document that it is envisioned for the use of things like error messages, it is defined as a general purpose ability to create limited new content. And it does more than the mutating of the existing content. So that does not appear to be in Charter for the simple delivery that we are allowed to define. And then the metadata extension language, which is extremely useful for a number of other documents. And it makes so much more sense to put it all together in one document that those other documents can cite. I think that will get better review and just makes a lot more sense organizationally. But our charter will need to be expanded in order to allow us to do that work. So my first question is, what ought we not attempt to do? We should probably not define interfaces for anything other than CDNs interoperating. We're the CDNI group, not just the I group. And we shouldn't define a general purpose templating language. And you'll see that reflected in my proposed changes to the charter. So this is the proposed language. And I tried to be very specific here. So feel free to nitpick as carefully as you wish. In our charter, we have a list of things that we will do and a list of things that we won't do. I am proposing adding these two elements to the bottom of the existing list. Feel free to open the existing charter to get a picture of the context. But if I put the whole charter on there, then y'all will all need opera glasses to read the slides. So the working group will focus on the following items: a specification for a CDNI metadata expression language. This document will provide a flexible templating language for the specific purpose of describing values and tests used in the CDNI metadata interface. And a specification for CDNI processing stages metadata. This document will define interfaces for content delivery that require the modification or creation of content to be delivered. This includes error messages and other simple strings, as well as values expressed via the metadata expression language. I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide, and then we're going to come back to this one for conversation. In particular, the working group will not define all the existing items, plus a general purpose templating language, or interfaces for communicating general purpose computational workloads. So this explicitly puts out of scope for the processing stages. It puts out of scope any sort of general purpose edge compute or any of that sort of thing, defining workloads and moving those around. If this group ever decides they need to do that, it'll be rechartering time again.
Just one quick, Guillaume, did you have any question here? A comment?
No, sorry, I just have to leave the queue.
Okay. And so if I can,
Sorry, if you, just a clarification question on the previous slide, if you can go back.
I knew I should have put these on the same slide.
With no head on, just a clarification question here is that what you're saying here is what this working group will not define. Are you proposing that language to be added in the document,
Yes.
or this is for the purposes of just explanation?
No, that I am suggesting that that these specific words be added to the charter exactly as they appear on the screen here. And if you think that's a bad idea, you should tell me.
I am just wondering if should the group focus on what the charter is versus what the charter will not be, because it becomes a much wider net of what this working group will not do, and because we're not focused on what this working group will not do, because there are many things this working group will not do.
That's true. This working group will also not define cheese making recipes.
Correct.
But so if you look at the existing charter has a list of things that we want to accomplish, and it has a list of things that we worried people would think that we were trying to accomplish, and so we wanted to specifically state that we're not trying to do those things. So this is the things that I worry someone might think we were trying to accomplish if we put them in if we put them in that first list. So I wanted to like set an upper bound.
I think the sentiment is in the right place. My concern is that the language such as general purpose templating language, I'm just wondering if is this too broad? Is this too wide?
So do you think that it would be appropriate for this group to attempt to define a general purpose templating language?
Depends on what they're trying to define. If it's general purpose for the CDN function, then it is. But it is, as you said, defining a recipe for how to make cheese, then that's not a general purpose that fits the CDNI working group. I think we've got a couple of other people joining in the queue, so I'm going to take myself out of the queue, and we can see what other folks have to say here. Guillaume.
Yeah. I think I'm pretty happy with what we have right now. So there is one bullet as part of the focus of the group that says a specification of the CDNI metadata interface. And this language has been created for that, right? So, okay, you can say, well, we're going to use it maybe in footprint and capability advertisement interface too. So that's okay, it's still there. So basically this language is used, I mean, it fits the necessity to have this language fits with the bullets, right? With the following, with the items that we have already identified in the charter. So I don't think it's necessary to extend the charter like it is, but it's just not a strong opinion. If you want to, the danger with what you are doing, what you would like to do, Chris, is that you are obliged to have a very well-defined and finely defined list of topics that you want this group to address, which oblige you to, maybe tomorrow I will bring something that is also linked with the, I have a presentation at the end of the meeting about APIs, and you may say also, well, I'm not sure it's part of we need to recharter the group. No, so I'm not sure it is necessary to do that. That's my opinion, but it's not a strong opinion.
So I developed this language after feedback from our inestimable AD that some of our work may be exceeding the bounds of our charter. Perhaps Francesca could give an opinion on the necessity or non-necessity of rechartering to accomplish this work.
We can wait. We can wait for Francesca. There are a couple more folks that want to chime in.
Okay.
So let's hear. Thank you, Guillaume. Anything else?
Good feedback.
No.
All right. So we've got Ben Ben is next.
Yeah, I want to first of all thank Guillaume for pointing that out, because I also just went and read that language in the charter, and I agree with Guillaume. I think it's covered by the existing language, but I understand if the powers that be disagree with that, so we're gonna have to add these new items. But I also agree with Sanjay. I don't understand why we have to define the negative. We're adding specific things that are supported. Why do we have to define the general case as a thing that we're not going to do? Because we're already not doing that, and it's already not in the charter. So why do we have to add the negative language to the charter, I guess, is my question. I don't understand that.
So I guess I can give some insight. So clearly I have brought this, like, let's make sure that what we're doing is in charter, and you know, we have been working on refining this language to make sure that there is no doubt that this work is in charter. And yes, it is possible that, you know, we can move the documents forward and there will be no objections from the rest of the ASG. This is sort of like guessing, you know. I don't have all the answers. Uh, if there is a doubt that this could not be in charter, I think it's worth doing this work just to clarify and cover all bases. And this is why I guess this, you know, this proposal was brought up. Yeah, it's a little bit additional work because there is some review that needs to go through, etc. But it also allows to make sure that we are all on the same page. So I think it is worth it. I think, you know, if, you know, the working group agrees, of course, if there is consensus, I think it is worth doing. And then in terms of why writing the negatives of what we don't do, that sets more clear boundaries of what this working group is doing. And that is also very appreciated by the ISG when they get to like review documents. It, you know, it might be clear to the participants of the working group, but it's also like clearly scoping what we are trying to do, and other working groups do it as well, like this is not in scope, this is not in scope, and it sort of addresses maybe concerns that the ADs might like the rest of the ASG might have when they read the charter. They might wonder, okay, so having that written black and white is helpful. So I am personally like, I like having that text. And if there is no disagreement that the text is correct in terms of what the working group is not going to do, then it doesn't hurt to have it there. If there is disagreement, then that's another discussion that we can have.
And to be a little bit more clear onto precisely what I think risks being out of charter, it's in, let me, the processing stages. The current charter allows us to define interfaces for the delivery of content. It doesn't currently allow us to define interfaces for the mutation or creation of content. And mutation might be arguably in scope, but creation honestly doesn't appear to be in scope. So creating responses to send to clients, there's a pretty solid argument that that is not currently in the scope of the current charter. For the metadata extension language, I think if this were the only thing, I would be tempted to argue that it was in charter because, frankly, we need it in order to coherently define the interfaces that are definitely in charter. Because we need the metadata extension language in order to define how those interfaces work. If the metadata extension language were just one section of a different document, I'm not sure anyone would blink at it. And I think that we would have a reasonable argument that we should put it in one document for organizational purposes. And so that one feels like a closer call to me. But if we're going to have to go through rechartering, making it crystal clear that metadata extension language is in charter, so that we don't have to have that conversation, feels like it's of value. But the big thing that feels out of charter is the creation of content to return to clients, and I think we've got a queue again.
Yeah, we've got Alan and then myself on the queue. Alan, go ahead. You're mute, Alan. You want to unmute?
Yes. So a few comments, right? So first, I think creating of content that is not in charter, I think that's really, we've been very precise about it. Like generation of error and error codes kind of as process can be seen as generating new content, because you could be delivering statutes and so on. So I'm not sure when we're saying generating content, where do we stop? So for example, generating errors and access control and maybe messages around that, these are something that are already out of scope, even without processing stages. So I think we have to be, I think, more precise when we're saying that. I understand what's being said, but kind of we need to say what is creating the content. But that's minor. If you can go to the slide of the proposed language, so a few comments on that. Yeah, so I think I understand that around MEL there is a concern that and the potential of MEL being more broadly used, right? And we don't want to do that. We don't want to kind of for this to become some form of generic kind of template language that can be used for kind of really outside of CDN interconnection context. At the same time, I think the language as written right now is too narrow for our purposes. I think saying that it's only going to be used within CDNI metadata interface is narrowing us. Clearly, MEL will have possibility. It can be used in the triggers, can be in the other interfaces. I would really say that it's something that we want to limit it to CDNI framework and find the right language, but I would not really narrow this to the point of saying this is one particular interface. I would say that here is a CDNI framework, a set of interfaces, and maybe additional interfaces. But within that context of CDNI interconnection, we want to be using MEL as broadly as possible. And that, I think, is in scope, and that's not an issue. So I think it's kind of being throwing a baby with the water here. I would really define it more broadly as CDNI, but CDNI, kind of all of CDNI. That's first. About that comment about not doing generic kind of what we're not doing, I agree with previous speakers. I think that if we feel the need to say that what it's not, maybe we're not defining properly what it is first. I think that's first. Secondly, I think that the limitation itself is really kind of in a fuzzy way. I'm not kind of really, that can be what we're not doing can be understood really very broadly. So if we're saying we're not doing this, what is generic compute template? What are we saying that we're not doing? I think that needs work. I think we do need to again, I understand that we're not going to get to sort of generic compute orchestration and configuration topics, right? But I think as part of processing stages, I can see the value in, for example, being able to refer to interfacing with external compute workloads, right? And I think that will be of value. So for example, as part of processing stages, to get to a point where we can say, well, if certain conditions are met, go talk to kind of external workload and using a particular interface, right? So I think is valuable, should be in scope. So, and I'm not sure that is kind of the current exclusion kind of probably, it's too, right now is too fuzzy and broad. So so when we get to that point, is it in charter? Is it our charter? So I think there is value in processing stages to talk, to kind of engage external workloads. And we need to define more succinctly and correctly kind of what we are doing and what we are not doing. And I think maybe if we do a better job with saying what we are, maybe there'll be less issue with sort of exclusion. That's what I have to say.
I'm hearing some. I'm hearing what sounds like a argument in favor of hashing out the exact details on the list. Does that sound right? I see head nods.
And so just one last comment, no chair hat on. I think for the negative part, unless we know very clearly we can come up with a language, we should not venture into saying what this working group is not doing, because I think that the language as it is written is too wide, and because it's wide, we don't need to say that unless we say that the metadata expression will not create this something that it is not supposed to. But maybe we should just take it to the mailing list and make sure that what the proposed language should be, and if we can fine tune that very clearly, that articulates what it is doing, then maybe we don't need to say what it will not do.
Yeah. So if I summarize the feeling that I get from the room, it's that perhaps I was a little overzealous with defining what it won't do, and that the group would prefer that we simply be much more careful about defining precisely what it will do, and that that I should refine that language, bring that charter language to the list, and we will have the discussion there, and make sure that people who weren't able to make the meeting are able to participate, and we'll do the consensus call there.
I see Francesca nodding her head in agreement with what you just summarized, and I agree with that as well.
Excellent. Then we do not need my last slide.
And what is your last slide? Yeah.
I think we have the answers to all these questions.
Yes. I had my poll ready, but I also realized that it's not needed. We got very clear answers. Okay, Chris is bringing up the next deck, and forgetting the order, that should be
Triggers, I think.
triggers. Yeah. So we may have to just speed up. May not give you full 20 minutes. We want to make sure that we've got enough time at the back end for the topics that you want to discuss. But take your time. Is still make sure that we. This is an important document. I know it's coming towards the end, so we want to make sure that we really understand it. All right, Jay.
Okay. All right, I'll try to talk fast. So, all right, thank you. So this is the update for Control Interface and Trigger, second edition. Let's see. I don't have control of the slides, do I?
You should now. You should see.
Okay. Yeah. Let me see. How do I advance? Yeah, I don't seem to have the controls to advance or anything.
You should. Did you give him the control?
I have not.
Oh, okay.
I don't know where the button is.
Okay, 1 second. I
think you may have to request. I think you may have to request slide control.
I did.
If you click on the user, if you go there on the user, and then click on the plus.
Okay,
now?
There we are. All right,
Yay.
Great. I appreciate it.
Sorry, you have a very green chair.
All right. So, all right. So definitely we've had some stuff going on since the last IETF. In the previous IETF, we were at version 14, and we have since published a version 15 right before the deadline on October 21st. And as we talked about in that particular meeting, there were some changes that we needed to make the specification more RESTful. So in terms of what changed in this, I think the changes ended up being a little bit more substantial than we had thought on this. But from a REST perspective, we ended up unifying the trigger specs, action states, labels, and errors into a single CI trigger v2 object that the UCDN and DCDN go and exchange representations for. And we unified trigger objects and filter collections into the CI trigger, what will be the CI trigger collection v2. As part of this, we ended up streamlining the document structure for better flow. One of the pieces of feedback I know that I had received was that it required a lot of switching back and forth between different sections of the document in order to fully understand it. So I think that will help out with this kind of issue here. We did some reformatting and syntactic cleanup of JSON examples, and also some clarification of the specific use case of purge and invalidation whenever acquisition is in progress. Alan will be talking about these particular categories shortly here. The thing that I would note is that version 15 is pretty much a more rough draft than what we have published, I guess, previously. We wanted to get something out there before the deadline, so definitely there are some things that need to be cleaned up, and a version 16 is already in progress. I have provided a diff from version 14 at the bottom of the slide here. I will note that there were some very substantial changes that kind of break the diff with regard to how we move some things around inside the document. So even though there might not have been a huge amount of really consequential changes to it, it certainly looks like it just because of the fact that we've moved some sections around in here. So with that covered, Ellen is going to present on the changes that we made into V15, and I will hand it off to him.
Thank you. I'm not sure if I have the control. Who has the control? Maybe
One second, Alan.
Right.
Click on the user. Yeah. Got it.
Yes. Okay.
Your buttons.
Thanks. I appreciate it. Yeah. So the previous drafts, I think we started the REST migration in the version 14 around sort of introducing the usage of HTTP methods for changing objects, but I think the really with version 15 the full conversion is coming, and we have changed the previous semantics of the CITV2 that dealt with command objects being passed by UCDN to DCDN and status object being returned, kind of command and respond kind of semantics, which dates back all the way to the beginning of this document from 2016, and probably even inherits the version 1, RFC 8007, because that's where we started. So as we're moving towards RESTful architecture in this interface and later in others, we move to kind of architecture in which the parties exchange representation of one object. So there's no command response, but rather UCDN passes representation of an object. If DCDN kind of takes that representation, creates an object, returns it back. So the parties really trade representation of an object as opposed to kind of command response kind of syntax. We're still allowing support of both version 1, which is command driven, and version 2 in the same interface. And this is differentiation is based on the MIME type. So the MIME type is we're introducing a new MIME type in this draft, CI trigger v2, instead of CI trigger command, which we had before. Yeah, and that sort of the same URL endpoint. So a client may use both and kind of either actually, and has to just differentiate the payload by using the MIME type. According to REST model, we kind of did away with commands. So there's no longer create command, modify command, but rather the HTTP methods just convey operations. It's post, delete, and get. As Jay mentioned, this joining this kind of command and response into one object. So there's one flat object called trigger in which we specify what to be done, how it's to be done, and all other attributes that fit into a trigger. Another change we've done is that previously the document used language of trigger status, which again, in context of REST would be status would probably better suited to describe status of an object, like current representation. And what we really meant is state, like and state machine that comes with that. So that's all the change with there. So now we're talking about trigger state. So triggers are pending, active, deleted. It's a state. It's not a status. And accordingly, there was like simplification of the language, because sort of we kind of, before that, we kind of danced around what trigger is. So there's a lot of language like triggered actions, trigger status resource, but really trigger is the core. I think trigger is a powerful concept that it's an operation that we want to invoke. And so I think language has been updated to reflect that, and has been clearer and simpler as a result. And this is kind of probably the main change in the draft conceptually. Similarly, we have merged the filtered collections and triggers into one trigger collection object. This is an object that DCDN creates, and it represents a plurality of trigger objects that are managed by DCDN. They are the plurality is updated with trigger resources changes. So as UCDN creates, deletes, or modifies triggers, or DCDN changes their status as the processing happens, plurality is updated. And filter collections, which used to be separate objects, become just different representations of the same object. So UCDN may request representation of an object in different ways in the request. And the ways are, there is we're now supporting an extension so that triggers may be listed as resource URLs for more abbreviated view. But if UCDN desires to see the full view of the triggers, we are supporting that as an extension. It's something that has to be advertised through FCI. So collection will return actually the triggers their full JSON representation in the collection in one call, to simplify, kind of, instead of doing back and forth and treating one by one, we can do now one API call, just give me all the triggers in one call. And as before, we're allowing kind of filtering of that plurality of all triggers by state. Give me all pending triggers, give me all active triggers, and by label. And label is a concept we introduced in the previous draft, allowing separation of namespaces, so you can actually have separate sets of triggers and manage and kind of retrieve the status separately. And trigger collection reflect that. Streamlined document structure, kind of Jay mentioned. So we've gone from 13 chapters down to 9, and multiple chapters have been merged. And I think it's kind of flowing better. Introduction, kind of what we're up against, sort of architecture, data model, various aspects of triggers, including, for example, kind of interconnected CDN use cases. So kind of overall introduction, description of the architecture, then description of the interface itself, description of all object properties and codings, FCI examples, and kind of and the supplementary chapter that talk about payloads and MIME types and security and references. So it should read better. One thing we need to do, and haven't quite figured yet, because of that sort of combined structure, we have deeper depth of the table of content. So we would want to show table of content kind of in 4 levels instead of standard 3, and we haven't quite figured yet. So that's something to do for next draft, to show table of content will be deeper. I know some RFCs have that. We are table of content 3 levels so far. So if anybody is familiar with XML kind of syntax to do that, really appreciate it. Help there. More minor changes. So we went through all the JSON. JSON comes in 2 forms. There are snippets within the interface document and examples, where actually there are request responses. So all JSON has been cleaned up and passes JSON validation and have a common format. So there was a lot of broken JSON in there before that didn't pass the test. And we also found a minor issue with the in the trigger spec type content object list, which was new. Kind of, we didn't use a key value pair as a spec value, which was a standard. We just put the object as a value, and that has been fixed. So now you have key objects, and the value is the object list object. So that's one fix. Important catch that we had is that sort of generally the document has been rather lax in terms of timing. I think the language that sort of, well, hey, UCDN may request changes and kind of may kind of send triggers, but really there's no saying when and how DCDN will process that. And there's in version 14, that's the language I'm quoting, timing is under DCDN control, so DCDN can actually choose to apply, invalidate, and purge. So basically, if trigger arrives while, and that's for purposes, I think, of the example, purge trigger, which you see on the diagram on the right. So if purge request arrives while DCDN while the CDN actually is in process of acquiring an object from UCDN, so it's up to UCDN whether to apply this to the content or not. This creates a problem, right? You see on the diagram, what can happen is that, let's say, request started, DCDN went to the origin to fetch an object. Purge arrives, object is purged. The response returns with something that already should be purged, because that was started before the purge. And then potentially the requester and maybe other requesters, so there are two requests here, will be getting out of date object, and actually that will live in the cache even though the purge has been completed, if we really allow DCDN to be so liberal with timing, like, oh, kind of do whatever. So in version 15, we fixed that. And what we're saying is that for any content acquisition that's in progress at the time when the purge arrives, DCDN should not place this content into the cache. The diagram that describes that, I'm not going into detail describing that, but the idea is that so you have request that's pending for acquisition. When it comes back, if it references something that's been purged or invalidated in the meantime. So first of all, any request waiting for that response to return should proceed immediately, not wait for that, because that response is no longer valid and shouldn't have been. And when the response does come back, it shouldn't be cached, and new content should be acquired with the correct version. So that's a fix that we had. And that's my last slide here, really. Okay, so what's next? So what's sort of what we're planning for version 16, and kind of as Jay said, like we immediately started with working on that after submitting version 15 just before the deadline. So we addressed a number of issues that we have encountered. So kind of in our peer review between me and Jay, so the spelling and grammatical issues already addressed. There was discussion comments from Brett Mertens on the list. In particular, he was asking for better clarity around which specs, trigger specs can be applied to what, because there's certain metrics of things that are supported. So not all trigger specs apply to all types of content metadata. So we actually, in version 16, introduced a chapter that addresses that. So kind of it's very clear kind of what combination are supported, what makes sense and what not. We also added support for if modified since the last modified conditional request. Currently, it's only ETAG. There is a mention of if modified since in version 15, but there's no full support. Version 16 provides full support of that and examples. So if you're looking to do kind of in the trigger interface to use caching using that's well defined now, or will be. We have fixed examples. First of all, there's a language in the spec right now that says triggers URI should not be reused, but examples have been using incremental numbers like 0, 1, 2, 3, and so on. We have added support for a recommendation for UID before usage and using that in the examples. We're also using separate domain names for DCDN and UCDN, because right now both kind of use example.com, which can be misleading. So we have two different domains indicating those two different entities. And also, importantly, a strict requirement, trigger arrives to DCDN. DCDN has a duty to locate the configuration matching that. So right now there's language in version 15 that says, oh, in the multi-connected CDN context, DCDN may not know which one of UCDN's the trigger belongs to, we don't think that's a valid approach, and we take a more strict view is that trigger should be matched to UCDN, and if no configuration is found, that should be rejected. So that's already in the version 16 draft, hasn't been published yet. Things that we're planning to do, and that hasn't been done yet, is that do a more thorough review of kind of what we call legacy areas around CDN cascading interconnected CDNs. That's not been an area of scrutiny because it's not something that's been, I think, of active interest for the community recently, but it's in the spec. It's kind of the language probably 6 to 8 years old. It requires review, and we'll do that. Extended examples. Not everything we specified has examples. Coverage is lacking, so we'll add kind of 2-3 more examples for sure, beyond I think 10 that we have right now. We need to finish refactoring filter collections. There's start of it in the version 15, but not fully done. So there's whole chapter 4.2, I think, that needs to be redone. And I cannot stress this enough. We need more reviews, so kind of please read the document. Version 15 is major change in terms of structure and language. So read, comment, and we're looking to incorporate all of that feedback into the next draft. Back to you, Jay.
Okay, thanks, Alan. So in terms of what is outstanding, so as Alan mentioned, we need to finish and then publish version 16 after IETF 121. More than anything, we need more reviews other than from the RFC authors. So in the last quarter, we received, I think, only 2 reviews that I'm aware of. Only one of those provided comments, which were placed in the CDNI list. So we could definitely use a lot more reviews than what we are currently getting. And I would say that this is going to be our biggest barrier to getting to working group last call. And then finally, incorporating the feedback from those reviews back into the document here. If you can advance to the final slide. Alan, do you still have control?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
Okay. Okay, and then pretty much the next steps, just a reiteration of what I mentioned. We definitely need more reviews. If you've got an interest in this particular document, if you plan on implementing it sometime in the future, we could definitely use your thoughts around this. We need to finish up that version 16 drafts, and I think our goal is to move towards working group last call at IETF 122. And that should be it.
So no comments, but thank you for the detailed walkthrough. And I think the document 15 is looking much better in just terms of the cleaning work that you have both done. And looking forward to the version 16, because that should really be in a shape where it can potentially be ready for the working group last call. Of course, given that we get some reviews as well, but looking forward to version 16. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, I think Alan, you probably are next here.
Yeah. So name footprints, right? Just quick recap, right? Of that, like what we're trying to do. And that's we discussed in several IETFs. There was the kind of private draft, and we adopted this name footprints as working group draft 2 ATFs back. Kind of we need better support for kind of functionality around management footprints. So that is semantical support for hierarchy, complex definition of the logic, dynamically changing footprints, and also use of footprints in more ways than it was done before. Really, FCI until now has been used as mostly kind of FCI, which stands for footprints capability. It was mostly capabilities, and footprints was an afterthought. So we need to really promote that to an object that can be used more broadly. So that's what the purpose of the draft. And I think the last IETF, sort of my presentation ahead of it, we kind of realized that there is a problem, because the FCI itself, the footprints, was defined in RFC 8008, which defines capability objects and attributes, but doesn't define an interface. In the meantime, there was RFC 9241, which defined an interface for FCI and added some extensions to footprints to support use of Alto, which is another standard application layer traffic optimization, an RFC 7285. And Alto itself had its roots in actually peer-to-peer application routing back in the day, over 20 years ago. But Alto became sort of a standard for specifying network topology, and kind of the way was for FCI to lean into this capability and use Alto for this topology specification. So Alto would define the topology, and then in FCI in 9241, we would just refer to those objects defined in Alto using this Alto PID concept, right? And that's sort of, in a way, before the set of, let's say, SVTA drafts came in, kind of started coming into IETF. What we have now, I think, with named footprint situation, that the draft right now defines the metadata objects, doesn't define the interface, but there is no Alto-less, the kind of FCI interface definition right now. Kind of, so there's no way kind of to specify exposure and exposure of these metadata objects without kind of using Alto. So what's been missing is that RESTful FCI interface definition that could expose footprints without using Alto. And that's the discussion we had as SVTA, and the proposed solution for this, and Guillaume, I think we'll talk about this later today, that there is a plan to bring forward a separate draft, separate from a named footprints, that will define a set of RESTful synchronous interfaces that will cover, at this point, we're looking at 4 different interfaces: bootstrapping, footprint capabilities, FCI configuration, and cache management as interfaces, right? And that kind of, when done, that will provide a vehicle to expose the named footprint objects. And as part of the plan would be that this interface would expose footprint URIs, and therefore, as a result, the metadata objects, footprint objects, could be used in FCI, right? So FCI capabilities could use those footprint URIs, as well as other interfaces. For example, in configuration, which is one of the important use cases, so you could actually tie configuration objects to footprints directly, and kind of sort of in the way that Alto PID was done before. There was like external reference. Same way we want to do this, just based on REST and this new FCI. As part of this work, this FCI will support the interface will have to support retrieval of individual footprints and all footprints, sort of like triggers, kind of footprints and collection of footprints in the same way. Provide a way to the interface will have to support hierarchy, which we built into the metadata, into data model, namespaces, and actually support for caching. So all of that is actually belongs in the interface. So the proposal is to actually proceed in parallel in 2 tracks. So have the interface with these functionalities, and probably additional ones, to be specified in that RESTful interface, and Guillaume will talk about that in more detail. And I will proceed with the current draft to focus on the data model and metadata object encodings for named footprints. And that will be something that provide alternative to basically Alto network map hierarchy. So kind of something that could be used without forcing use of Alto. And if this is an acceptable plan, then I think that's kind of that separation of work. So in the interface draft, there has to be interface definition, One of the feedbacks that we got from actually previous IETF that was an ask for better support for very large footprint advertisements. I'm not sure it was very specific, but I think that's certainly something in our mind and has to be addressed in the interface, kind of the proper support for caching. That was the third item, was actually review options. So that's actually what we are now proposing, is that not to merge, but to have one draft for interface, another draft for metadata objects, and kind of that is the main footprint. In the draft itself, that we just need to basically do that separation and see if there's, so interface was not specified in the name footprint draft so far, but we need to review the text to see that maybe some portions have to move to the interface draft. That's work that has to be done. I think we need a better job explaining the rationale for that, why we want something that is not Alto, kind of. So that's what we're trying to do, like maybe provide more language that talks about the history of FCI and Alto in the working group, because that was, I think, not clear enough, and there were questions coming up, like, wait a second, we already did this, how that kind of works with Alto. We need to do a better job explaining this, just kind of painting the picture. And there are several kind of outstanding comments about syntax and so on. So there's like there was some review that you provided some comments, and some comments from Jay. So that needs to be done. But I think now that we have like a sort of the big picture clear, we have a way to move forward. I think we can tackle that. Additional item that I think we didn't discuss before, but now that Mel is on the agenda for chartering, one of the things we're proposing, the name footprints, is actually use of Mel in definition of footprints. And for that, the MEL itself needs to be extended. So we're proposing several extensions to allow operations on IP and endpoints within MEL. So then MEL could be used as footprint definition language. So assuming the MEL draft will be accepted and the chartering will happen, then there is actually, my proposal would be to move those changes to the MEL draft. I think, as Chris, you said today, that MEL should be separate documents. So if any other kind of documents use it and propose some modifications, I think it makes sense to move it to that MEL pending draft as opposed to specify that in the main footnotes. So that's the plan. And if kind of there are no questions, comments, I think that
We've got a question from Chris.
yeah, I see that.
Less question and more some observations. First of all, I second your observations about the MEL draft. I think that's exactly the right place to divide up the work. That's fantastic. I want to point out we may need to. This may be another place where we need to be very clear about which components of the charter we think support this work, specifically the RESTful interface work. I think I see where it goes, but if you can be very clear about that on the list, that would be helpful. And then lastly, I suspect that this is going to be a document that will benefit from HTTP director review once we have it in good shape and whatnot. So let's make sure that we get HTTP dir review before we go to last call.
Yeah, we're not close to last call yet. I think that when you say this document, like, do you mean RESTful interfaces draft or
the RESTful interfaces draft? That's the one that would benefit from HTTP dir. And you're right, nowhere near that. Just making sure that it stays on our roadmap.
Makes sense.
And that had a chair hat on.
Yeah, I would want just one more comment. I think that's, again, Guillaume will talk about that, but I think the work we've done on the triggers and actually providing framework for doing REST in the CDNI, I think, be a good basis for this draft as well. So, but I'm done with this section.
Thank you, Alan. All right, Alfonso, I think you're next. I know you've been waiting patiently, so the document should be coming up shortly.
Thank you, Sanjay.
H cache. Yes.
You have some
Okay. I hope you can hear me.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry about my webcam. I don't know why it's not working. Well, I think I will be quick. This is about the document edge control metadata. That's a working group document. Just a quick abstract of the document. This configuration, this specification define metadata objects related to controlling edge servers in the configuration from an upstream CDN to that upstream CDN, permitting to configure how an edge server is able to manage coarse response headers. Also defining rules regarding compression, body compression, and client connection timeouts. We presented in the IETF 1.2.0 the version 2 that after a deep review from Kevin Ma, multiple comments. So we addressed, I think, the most of the comments. We review all this on IETF 1.2.0. So I think I'm not going to go through this again. So from the meeting, we have two things to solve. First was a question that we didn't answer in IETF 1.2.0. There was a comment from Kevin Ma regarding to separate examples to in a different section. This document for when we define examples for each of the sections of the document, we are only including one example on each of them. So, well, I feel that maybe it's not really needed to add a section for adding just one example for each of the sections, as we've seen in other documents. But I'm open to know if there is a consensus that it's better to have a section for one example or not. So I think it would be good that I don't know if there is any comment on this from the chairman or yes, Chris, please.
With no hats on, I like seeing a separate section, but that is aesthetic.
Excuse me, sorry, I need you to repeat. I didn't get it.
That's an aesthetic opinion.
Okay.
I don't think there's a wrong answer here.
Yeah.
I just like a separate section. Again, no hats.
Okay. Yeah, understood. Thank you. Well, I guess that then my preference will be to maintain the examples after the sections by now, unless there is any other strong opinion to the opposite. The other point that wasn't not addressed in the version 2, and this is an outcome at IETF 1.2.0, sorry, is that there was a comment because there is a definition of the use of MI pattern match from RFC 8006. In the document, we include the same definition that is in the RFC 8006. The outcome of the meeting was to refer directly from this document to RFC 8006. We haven't done that yet. The plan is to upload the version 3 after the meeting, including this reference. So this comment will be addressed conveniently. And these two are the only things that were missing from the previous comments of the review of the document. So I think after uploading version 3 with these two things, we would like to ask for the group if we feel that it's a good moment to pass the document to last call and to do more review from more people and proceed with it.
Yes. Thank you, Alfonso. Yes, so I think that's a good plan. Please go ahead and submit the version 3. I know chairs will review it, but additional reviews definitely help.
Yeah.
And then once there's version 3 comes out, reviews happen, then we can take that determination whether document is ready for the working group last call.
Okay. I guess that then this will be discussed in the mailing list, Sanjay?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, for reference in the slides, there is all the comments that we address in version 2, if anybody wants to see it and to have it as an index of what was discussed. But for me, it's enough now. Thank you.
Thank you, Alfonso. Okay, I think Guillaume, you're next. So Chris will bring up the slides.
Yeah, can I bring my slides because I've sent you.
Yeah,
to
I did upload
course.
your latest version.
Cool.
We can pass you the which one you want to do first.
Well, according to the schedule, this is a control interface, the REST
Yep.
API.
Yep.
No, this is not the last one, but that's okay.
The control interface.
The last one I sent is the name slightly changed. I sent it a couple of hours ago, right?
Yeah, I did pick them up.
Okay. Right, that's the one. Do I have the control? How does it work? Ask to share screen. I have the
Have to
control.
press the button.
Cool. Okay, so yeah, an overview first. So what we want to propose here is in CDNI is a new internet draft about HTTP REST API. So for now, in the control interface, you have the trigger control trigger interface, but that's it. And we would like to go further and to propose to gather the set of REST API that we have already thought about in SVTA, mostly. And this new REST API would be very helpful for exploiting the different interfaces and that already exist in CDNI, right? So I mentioned some of them, so maybe I forgot some, but okay, that's basically the idea. And this the set of HTTP REST API would complement the control trigger interface. And we'll rely on it. So the control trigger interface is part of it, should be part of it. So why do we propose this? So as I said, for now, we have only the control trigger interface that is based on a pool model. So basically, you request the downstream CDNs to fetch some information, right? Some metadata if it's about metadata, or some files, or let's say payload if it's about content management. So that imposed an interaction model that is rather complex, and that's forces the UCDNs to implement and to expose an HTTP endpoint. We have also discovered there is absolutely no interface. I mean, API, well-defined API for the footprint and capabilities. And for other topics that we are currently thinking of proposing to CDNI, which is bootstrapping. And just a mention of them, there is also nothing regarding content management. Well, there is something, but not sufficiently developed, I think. Okay. Apart from that, we still have also, it's very difficult for someone that just joined CDNIs to understand how to operate the various interfaces, right? So that's why we would, I think we would, in this new document, in this new internet draft, we would, beyond describing all the REST APIs, we would also propose to understand how we should operate the different APIs in an harmonized way. Okay, so the proposal. We propose a new set of API, REST API that would based on a push model instead of a pull model like we have today. Two modes of operation, not only asynchronous like the triggers offers, but also synchronous mode. It would complement and rely, as I said, on the trigger interface. And this REST API covers the entire control interface footprint, which means bootstrapping, which is under construction for the moment. Footprint and capabilities, like you know it. Configuration, that means the metadata interface, and cache management, the things that Alan talked about a little bit. And we would add a basic set of workflows to understand how to use the various APIs. That's almost it for the proposal. I just here in the next slides give an overview, just to have an intuition of, well, more than an intuition. I mean, we have already worked out, and most of these API have already been tested within the SVTA testbed framework. And just to give you an idea of what it could be, right? It's a very simple set of APIs. So this is for footprint and capabilities. There is a subscription service that allows you to be, like to offer you a kind of callback mechanisms for being aware when the footprint and capabilities changes in the DCDN side. This is about the configuration. So we will still reference the triggers and their extensions, the trigger API and their extensions, but we would add a new API, as I said, according to the push model. So this is a very simple one, put the configuration, get the configuration, delete the configuration, and we will have some variation around it. We can configure it on a host basis, on a host name basis, or we can configure on a path pattern basis. And then we have to also a way to operate the CI trigger status. This is part of the CTCI trigger interface RFC, where we are able to operate we rely on this trigger status as part of the REST API. We are currently defining a notification service for the configuration the same way it exists for the FCI. And then we have the Bootstrap API. I'm not going to details and depict it, but it's because it's going to be a subject of the new draft. But well, it would be we would brought this Bootstrap API in this draft. It's already the subject of a separated work in SVTA, but it will be there. Cache management, we mentioned it. Again, the cache management relies on the work that Alan has just has presented previously. Alan and Jay, and we would add a new REST API that is related to cache bucket. It's a notion that is explained that we have defined in very, very convenient notion that we be very helpful to have. So again, it will be described here. And that's it. And this is an example of simple workflow, how to combine two interfaces, FCI and management and the configuration interface, just to understand how you could set up, a CDNI connection between an upstream CDN and a downstream CDN. That's it for this one.
All right, thank you. By when do you plan to submit the draft?
I have sufficient material, so the way I'm working on it is to just have this aggregation of all these APIs in a same document, and then translate this document into an IETF draft document, and that's what I'm doing now. So probably in let's say, I don't know, probably not before the end of the year, but beginning of next year for sure.
Thank you. Next slide go on.
So this one is about, extending the request routing redirection interface. If I remember well, that's exactly the name that we've had in the CDNI for this interface. So what it is about, a new draft for expanding the capabilities that have been defined in 7975 in RFC related to request routing redirection. What we have added in this new draft, what we want to add in this new draft is the support of manifest rewrite, which is another way for doing request routing, And we want to deal with a simple mode also that is known as HTTP proxy. Right? We don't touch about the DNS redirection basis. It's really about manifest rewrite support and simple HTTP proxy mode. So the problem is the following. The downstream CDN can only provide a URI for redirection. That's it. So basically, the DCDN cannot modify or rewrite a manifest, right? So it's not possible today. And the DCDN cannot deal with the user request directly, right? So the user request is just catched by the UCDN, and UCDN has to, somehow translate this request into the current post definitions that is currently specified in the spec. And this is all this makes the request routing redirection not very efficient in some use cases. In addition, we have discovered that in some implementation, the request router, the DCDN request router, the entity that exposed this request routing redirection interface has no possibility to access to the content source. So that's also a problem that we want to solve with this extension. So the proposal is to add redirection features, right? So after receiving the user request, we call it the request-driven mode. Then we propose a way to forward this request to the downstream CDN request router, and also before sending a response. So imagine that UCDN gets the response, and before sending back to the user, it will submit this response to the downstream CDN over this request routing interface. That's the two modes that we want to add and depict in this extension. So I don't have a lot of times because there is still another topics to present, but basically in the slide deck you will find you find the workflow, the detailed workflow about the request-driven mode, which is more or less a proxy mode, right? So basically the UCDN request router receives the request from the user and forward the request to the downstream CDN request router, right? That's basically this. We have a subtlety here because the downstream CDN can have different response. It can respond with a HTTP redirect. It can respond with a content. It can also respond with a particular error code that will trigger this response-driven mode I was talking about previously. And here we have the next slide. We have the workflow for the response-driven mode. So not going to give you more information about it. It's just right. The key information is we want to extend the request routing redirection interface to add more flexibility, more possibilities in regarding this recursive mode. And by the way, because all this is for power the what we call the recursive mode in CDNI. Thanks.
Thank you, Alan. Guillaume, yeah, and we'll see your draft when you submit it.
Yep.
All right. So, Alan, you have about 7 minutes or less to wrap up your presentation.
Yeah, sure, and I will be quick. Thanks for that. So again, in terms of upcoming work and plans for next IETF 1 to 2, we have published at the CTA the cache management interface version 1.0. That's a CTA reference. It's SVTA document 2046. The purpose of the document has been to define industry standard interface for CDN cache management, and with sort of sub use cases, kind of support standard way for propositioning, invalidation, and purge in a way that kind of would meet the requirements of sort of modern kind of CDN industry. Second, which would kind of allow automation of processes that usually today are manual or semi-manual in the industry. Multi-CDN approach, sort of in terms of both UCDNs and DCDNs, something can be used across by UCDN working with multiple DCDNs and DCDN working with multiple UCDNs, kind of many-to-many relationships. Span operator CDNs and public CDNs as one. So that was ambition. Enable some functionality, including more kind of specific functionality around performance optimization. So use cache management actually for cache enhancement by allowing UCDN and DCDN to share hints about popularity of objects, not necessarily objects themselves, but information about popularity that can drive efficiency for DCDN. Allow for more finely tuned placement of content and cache management. So not deal with DCD in a single bulk, but allow some regional policies in cache management by region and by layer within DCDN. And also support for kind of deep edge caching with kind of quota support for cache management and support for not just caching, but also replication uses. That was ambition. In terms of the scope, what came out of it, right, the interface heavily relies on extends and actually influence the CIT v2 trigger interface. That's kind of the main vehicle for implementing those operations. We also added new metadata objects that govern some aspects of cache management that have been lacking so far. So they're objects that will govern priority. So instruct UCDN instructing DCDN how to manage priority of objects in a differential way. To tag objects so they can be used more efficiently and addressed more efficiently, as opposed to kind of just using URL matches and lists. And also placement of cache objects in storage, defining kind of what we call cache buckets. So for that, we support additional RESTful interface for cache bucket management. So allowing UCDN to create separate kind of virtual caches we call cache buckets, kind of sort of intended here as well, and then to allow UCDN to manage that. And we also added CIT v2 extensions. Writing the CIT v2 trigger extension mechanism, we added 3 new extensions, and that really is the scope of the document. In terms of just the plans, right? This is how this document is actually going to look like at IETF, and some of those drafts already underway. So the CIT v2 draft, actually the work that we have added this year from the draft 13 to 15 and onwards, includes some of the work that started in this originally in the cache management document. So execution policy, object-less support, FCA updates to support separate management of metadata and content, RESTful architecture big time, and support for URL types. Just those changes that functionality that initially was in the cache management, they are in CIT v2 already. So we actually removed that from the document because CIT v2 adopted that, but that started in the document initially. And name footprints as well. So kind of this draft also something that cache management uses and relies upon. So those drafts already underway, in flight, in progress. Kind of new drafts that are planned. First is just what Guillaume spoke about, this RESTful interface will include the cache management, including the cache bucket interface and name footprint support. So this draft will cover that. And we plan to introduce 2 new drafts, and this is one draft that will govern and define the new metadata objects, cache bucket, the cache bucket reference, kind of the blue, cache priority and grouping extended. So kind of managing priority and tagging of objects, so metadata draft, and separate draft that will define trigger extensions, extended policy for preposition, purge, and schedule. And again, the plan is to introduce those 2 before next IETF to submit those drafts.
Thank you, Alan. We've got Chris on the queue.
And obviously, I'll be brief. No hats on. Are you familiar with the cache groups work from the HTTP BES?
Cache group?
Yeah.
I guess.
I just linked the thing. We won't have time to discuss it. You should read that draft. It's in working group last call. If you have feedback on it, that's useful to them. But most likely, you will you will find that it is useful for defining your cache bucket. It appears that this exact concept is being defined in 2 separate working groups simultaneously at the IETF, and we may need to communicate.
Sounds good. I'll do that.
And I know we're at the top of the half hour here, but just before we end the session here, just wanted to see if Francesca, if you have anything to say. Francesca has a no nod and a thumbs up, so she doesn't have to say anything, and she's all good.
And lastly, there will be a call for document shepherds on the list. Please seriously consider putting yourself forward for shepherding documents. Historically, documents have been shepherded by chairs in this group. I would like to encourage more broad participation in that particular process.
All right, with that, the session comes to an end. Thanks very much, and we continue to look working in the mailing list between now and the March IETF 122. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.